Are you thinking about a Raspberry Pi 400? Would you like to know how to get started with it? Stay tuned and I'm going to show you some options. Welcome to another edition of Tech Bites with Ron Nutter, your home for all things relating to smart home technology. In this episode, we're going to talk about unboxing and setup of the Raspberry Pi 400. Hi, I'm Ron Nutter, and we're going to be working on this together. This content is also available as an Amazon flash briefing or podcast. Please go to techbiteswithronnutter.com for more information. For any items mentioned in this episode, there are affiliate links in the description. If you click on these links, I will get a small commission, but that won't affect the price you pay for the item. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please click on subscribe now and enable notifications. If this video helps you or provides value, please click on the like button, thumbs up. Now, here's what we're going to be covering. First, we're going to get into the unboxing of the Raspberry Pi 400, and really pretty straightforward, but if you've never done this before, I know you want to be very careful, and I respect that. The next thing we're going to do is actually go through the initial setup, and I got a couple of tips for you on that one that may save you some heartburn, and I had to pay the price and you won't have to. And then we'll talk about some next steps in your Raspberry Pi 400 journey. Now let's get you started. Now, if you're like me, you sometimes, especially when you're dealing with something you've never worked with before, you kind of like to have a little bit of a heads up on what to expect when you're getting started. And that's exactly what we're going to do with the Raspberry Pi 400. Depending on when you're seeing this video, they are, at least in the latter part of 2020, are a little bit hard to get a hold of. I had to scrounge through every supplier that was listed on the Raspberry Pi org website. Finally found it, ended up getting the kit. Now there's two ways you can get it. If you get just the Raspberry Pi 400, you're going to get just the keyboard. That's it. No muss, no fuss. You're done. If you did like I did, because I wanted to have the complete package just to get what the experience was going to be like, then I got the Raspberry Pi 400 kit. And that's where we're going to get started in unpacking. So let's get to having some fun. All right, now I'm going to reach over here. We're just going to slip this sleeve off. There may be a little bit of tape holding this together, but nothing that you can't get taken care of. When we get the keyboard, and if you've seen my gift video, you pretty much know what you're dealing with here. And there should be a little SD card. Well, here, get this out of the way. There should be a little SD card right there when you first get this out of the box. All right. Then they do to you have an efficient use of cardboard in here. We got the Raspberry Pi 400 mouse. That's the real reason I wanted to get the official kit, because I've never had the Raspberry Pi mouse before. Raspberry Pi supply. And then we'll have the HDMI cable that comes with this. We have the SD card carrier, so if you happen to put this in a regular desktop, you know what to do. And let me get all this cardboard out of the way here. This is the book. If you're brand new to the Raspberry Pi 400, or even if you've used one, even one of the earlier Raspberry Pis, there's a lot to go over here that kind of may get you exposed to some things that you hadn't looked about or hadn't thought about any other way. First thing we're going to do is get everything else unboxed, but let me tell you right now that the last thing you want to do is hook up the power, and here's why. When I was working with one of the regular Raspberry Pi 400s, I was hooking and unhooking for a monitor, and yet the power was still applied to the Raspberry Pi 400. What ended up happening was that HDMI port failed, and it just was no way around it. I couldn't get it to come back to life. So please, power needs to be the last thing that you hook up. Let's go ahead and get finished here. We've got the power supply unboxed. Nice color coordinated mouse for the Raspberry Pi. So we'll set all these other boxes off to the side. Don't need the drill bit anymore. Note to self, I need to get a pocket knife over here. Now, it doesn't really matter which one of the ports you hook up the mouse to. I would match white to white only because that way you'll leave your two USB 3 ports ready to go. They don't really tell you which one, but start off with this HDMI port that's closest to the micro SD reader. And we'll get the mouse straightened out here and get the power cable out of the way here. Now, there is no on-off switch with this, so I would suggest plugging in to the power port. And that's the only thing this port is going to do for you, is you hook the power in there, and then you can go ahead and get the power supply plugged in. There are some extensions that you can get with some of the Raspberry Pi kits where you will get a little intermediate piece that gives you an on-off switch, so you'll have a hardware way of shutting the power on and off. If I can find a link to one of those, I'll get it in the show notes, and that way you'll have an idea of a little bit extra thing to go get. Shouldn't be that expensive. So let's go ahead and get the power up process started. As you are installing your latest smart home device, grab a copy of my smart home checklist. This will help you record information about each device as you set it up. This will prove helpful when you need to find out where to get the firmware updates from or support on that device. You will be subscribed to my email list in exchange for the checklist. I won't share, rent, or sell your information to anyone. Okay, let's go ahead and get the Raspberry Pi 400 plugged in. We should have an image come up here in just a second. Okay, the field monitor is resetting. And now we'll start to see the fun stuff come up here. And it went through a quick abbreviated post process. I see the cursor blinking in the upper left hand corner. There we go. Okay, it's resizing the card. So if you've not set up a Raspberry Pi before, that's pretty normal the first time out. When they burn the image or create the micro SD card for it, it has to do a resizing the first time it boots up. And then you'll get kind of the full screen color process there. And then we should start getting some some raspberries up in the corner. Okay, one just flashed. And this is the first time I've powered one up. So I'm going by my previous Raspberry Pi experience. It's got the cursor just went away that was in the upper left-hand corner. All right. So let's go ahead and go through the process here. The first time through, I'm going to put it on wired. And I had my network cable off to the side here, and I forgot in my rush to get things up and running, I forgot to do it. Now, as you can see right now, the power light is up, and none of the other two lights should be blinking. Actually, it's probably getting its network connection now, because I just saw the power light flicker for a little bit. The caps lock and num lock are no longer on. So let's get back over here, and then we can finish getting started here. All right, so now that has changed. So that shows you that there is a network connection up and running, and ETH0 is what it's going to refer to the wired Ethernet port for, and WLAN is not associated. We'll get that fixed here in just a minute, but the first time through, I wanted to bring it up that way. Bluetooth is turned on. I would say turn it off to start with, because unless you're going to be using something like a Bluetooth wireless keyboard, and why would you when you already got into the keyboard there? But anyway, that's beside the point, and it does tell you your IP address there, so that's good. So we'll click on next, and we will change country to United States for me. English, don't know where that time zone is, so we'll change it to Chicago, because that's the closest to me. And we'll say use US keyboard. We've already said use English language, so that's fine. And we'll click next. Okay, setting location, and it's probably going to want to do a password. So we'll go ahead and enter in. I'm starting to type and nothing's working. So therein lies the other problem, that I'm not using the keyboard that's right in front of me. So let me get backed up here, because I think it may hit spacebar and hit tab to go down to the next one. And then now, if you want to verify before you hit the next button, you can just check on the hide characters checked box where it is unchecked, and then you'll see what you've typed in both fields. Passwords don't match. Okay, well, and see, that's where if I'd have done this right, yeah, there's my problem. Okay, and then we'll click next. Screen shows a black border. Okay, that's getting to something I think the term I should use is overscan, and it's going to check for wireless networks. I'm not too concerned about that at this point, and it's found all the networks, so that's fine. I'm going to leave it on wired for right now. Well, you know what? Let's just go ahead. While we're already here, I can go down here, pick my 5 gig network, enter that, and it's connecting to the network. Okay, it wants to update the software. So now that we're on wireless, we can go over here and just unhook the wired. I just normally, when I first bring one up, it's an old habit that I will leave. I'll go ahead and plug in a wired connection. So we'll click next. It'd be nice if it had a details button there so where it could tell you what what it was seeing, but it's going through the updated list right now. It shouldn't take too much longer. Okay, it's installing the languages. And if you're used to dealing with a command line situation, then this is going to be a little bit different, which is not a bad thing. You're going to always get back to command line with this one, and I'll show you how here just once it's downloading the updates. Well, while we're waiting for it to do that, if you go up here and click on the terminal icon, you see it opens up what you would think of as a command line window. So that's how you would get into it if you're used to operating from that perspective. You can very quickly get to there, but leave the GUI up. So that it's handy when you're first getting started with a new environment to have both available. Now, I have a tendency for the most part to lean towards command line, especially when I'm running something like Docker, and I've got one of my other videos out here that shows how to do that, which is not quite like VMware, but it's another way of approaching the solution with some differences. You don't want the overhead of a GUI sitting out, and in that case, you want to give all the resources to what it's doing, because you're not going to talk to it by the GUI anyway. Well, while we're waiting for that fun bit to finish, let's go review a couple of things that you may not have thought about. Or if you have, I'll give you a different way of looking at it. One of the things that you're going to come up with is you can never have enough micro SD cards. And this was a pack I got on Amazon. It was 5 of these plus the micro SD reader. So this gives you a way of plugging in using one of those blue USB ports, which is USB 3.0. So this gives you a way of having some extra storage beyond the micro SD that's in the back. So this came with the package. You might have paid a few dollars more, but it came with 5 of these. So this way you've got all sorts of things you could try without having to continually overwrite the one card you got. And I would probably leave that one card alone. Now, another thing you'll want to have is some sort of card case. This is set for both SD and micro SD. So this is going to be something that will help you keep them organized. And you may want to take like a very fine permanent marker and put the cards 1, 2, 3. And then have some sort of little 3x5 card or something you keep handy with this, or keep it in a notepad somewhere to keep track of what is on which one of the cards. Again, not a bad thing to have in the grand scheme of things. And sometimes when you buy the SD cards, each of them will come with its own little carrier, which is, again, not a bad thing. You can never have enough of those. So let's switch back over here, and then we can see how we're going. So we're moving right along. And the first time you do this, and it's probably a good thing to do this the first time out, is go ahead and get the updates applied. That way you're going to have less of a chance of running into bugs or gremlins, pick your verbiage. Now, if you've never dealt with a Raspberry Pi before, this is the environment that I would probably start with, because you will think in GUI maybe a little bit easier to start with, but certainly go to command line as soon as you feel comfortable with it, because there will be times when you're going to have to get to the command line to get to the log files, or if there's a configuration file while things were being installed and something goes a little bit wonky, it will be good for you to know how to find those files. There's all sorts of things that you can do with the Raspberry Pi. And one of the next videos I'm going to do is do what I call my Office in a Box setup. And that is something where you could take either the Raspberry Pi 400 or a regular Raspberry Pi for that matter, and plug it in as the first thing on a switch, either at home or if you're trying to set up temporary office, and it could provide DNS and DHCP services and get you up and running. So you didn't have to wait for the servers to be brought in, or if you're trying to run a lab situation for you and your friends, if you're going to have some sort of a LAN party or something, this way you would have everything you needed to provide those services. But there's, like I said, all sorts of things that you can do to move forward with that one. And I've got a whole host of videos planned out. It'll be coming out over the next several months. I'm going to try on this specific subject to at least do 1 or 2 a month more as I've got the time and I see the interest, because there's all sorts of things you can do. Now, if you've already got a good feel for the Raspberry Pi, then what we're going to be looking at is something for somebody who is in the IT arena or wanting to get into the IT arena. And this is where the Raspberry Pi 400 or the Raspberry Pi, either one, are excellent ways to do it, because more and more of the IT area, you've got to know some Linux, or at least know how to navigate in it. Even if you're running a turnkey system like a voice PBX or other things, most of them are running some flavor of Linux under the hoods. So if you know how to navigate the directories, then you're one step ahead, and that might just be the thing that helps distinguish you from the other folks. So that's just, there's all sorts of possibilities for the Raspberry Pi, and this has come so far from when they just came out several years ago. And the Raspberry Pi 400 is something, it's good for a little corner of the house. I'm looking for a temporary or portable monitor to allow this to be carried in a very thin briefcase, or possibly the right kind of Pelican case when I can find it, because that way you can have it in your vehicle or have it nearby. Is a good troubleshooting tool. So that's something too, with all the software that's out there. And we should be through here in just a moment. It seems like the faster you want it to proceed is the longer that it's going to take. Okay, well, now it's just about to get finished with having all its fun, so we can start sharing in a few things. Okay, now it's installing them. System's up to date. All right, and it does want to do a restart, and I'm not surprised about that. So we'll click on, we'll close that rear window. I was looking at some other things we would want to look at for a later video. So we'll click restart. Okay, and my monitor is directly tied to this. It's showing no signal, so that should be fine. It should come up. There we go. Now it's going to start to come up here. And we should have the desktop up momentarily. Can't complain about that. So it did come up on wireless, or is coming up on wireless right now. Okay, there we go. It just got associated with that. And we can go ahead and turn off wireless, because I hooked the network cable back in again, because wireless was a little varying a little bit more than I would like. That's something else I'll have to go look at. Now, if you've never seen the Raspberry Pi desktop before, now you notice it's now completely out to all the edges. That one question I did answer about having that there was black border there, told it needed to change a setting. So if we go to preferences, Raspberry Pi configuration, now this initially didn't want to come up while we were doing the updates. That's because it sensed something was changing the backgrounds. So this is going to be a way that you can make changes to it from within the GUI until you're familiar with how to do it from command line. So it's got all sorts of options here. And the nice thing is, if something really gets messed up, you've got a way around it. So you can turn on things like VNC, where you can get into it remotely. There's a camera that you're going to have to do a little bit different way of hooking it up. That's something I haven't even gotten near yet. But you can do overclocking. Word to the wise, don't think about that for a while yet, because with not having a fan built in on this one, or the ability to add one, you're going to get this box a little on the hot side. So that's auto login. So it's automatically logging in as user Pi if you want to disable it. So if you're going to share this with the kids, that would be a good thing to do. If you wanted to wait for the network before it comes up, again, your call, but ideally you should be able to use this without any change. Now, it was blinking, well, I guess when it was downloading something over the network, because now if it's any disk activity, and I kind of like to know something's going on. So we'll make that change. Man, it just went away. But there are all sorts of things that you can get started with. There's a version of LibreOffice built in, or Libre, or however you want to pronounce it. It's an open source version of a Office package you're probably used to. There is a web browser built in. So you've got some things to sort, and you also got games. So you can kind of get a feel for it, get used to using the keyboard. You've got Raspberry Pi diagnostics. There's an SD card copier. We'll go over that in a future video so that we can show you how to copy the card that you've got and see how well it works. We may have some things to look at there. So this is what you can kind of expect to find with the Raspberry Pi 400. It's very versatile. It's a good way to get started. So this way, with the Raspberry Pi 400, you don't have to worry about a bunch of cables and having the little box and then the keyboard and the mouse. You can have it kind of fairly self-contained, and that way if it's something that you want to take with you when you're traveling, or if the kids are going to the grandparents' house, that, you know, this is fairly compact and it's not that much more to take along than a game console would be. So this is, you know, just our first steps. You and I are both going to be learning a lot on this as we move forward. If you're watching this on YouTube, you're going to see some videos on the screen that are similar to the one you've just watched, or other content that YouTube thinks you might be interested in. If this video helps you or provides value, please click on that like button, thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please click on subscribe now and enable notifications. We'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.